107 combat clashes have been recorded on the front since the beginning of the day. The situation remains most difficult, but under control in 3 directions. Which ones exactly? Find out in our report.
A Ukrainian Su-27 fighter jet destroyed a command post of Russian occupiers in Bakhmut with a precision-guided bomb. According to Ukrainian military personnel, the enemy had only recently managed to deal with the aftermath of the 2 previous strikes. Intercepted communications indicate that the attack was quite effective, and in the Lyman direction, Ukrainian soldiers discovered and destroyed the position of the so-called Russian drone operators, who had been shelling defense forces' positions using a fiber-optic guided drone. As a result of a precise strike, the enemy's shelter was blown up, and the operators who tried to escape the position on a motorcycle were eliminated as well. More than a quarter of all Russian assaults recorded on the front line since the beginning of the day were repelled by Ukrainian soldiers in the Pokrovsk direction. Military experts note that the fighters are not only holding the defense steadfastly, but are also successfully counterattacking.
Moreover, note that it is precisely this tactic of Ukraine's defense forces that currently allows them to keep 33% of Donetsk region under control, which is a failure of Russian tactics, and most importantly, the political plans of the Russian leadership regarding the seizure. In the territories of Luhansk and Donetsk regions, even in the 4th year of the war, not even the intermediate plans of the so-called special military operation have been fulfilled at this point.
The situation is also difficult in the Oleksandrivka and southern Slobozhansk directions. There, since the beginning of the day, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Ukrainian soldiers have repelled more than 30 Russian assaults in total.
They even tried to attack with columns in the Oleksandrovsk direction, but everyone knows perfectly well how that turned out. The column didn't make it through because today the mechanized component, to be honest, no longer plays the role it did a year ago, let alone 2 years ago. Today there is little air cover. Drones now completely dominate this part of both the attacking and defending forces. That's why dead drones are now 100% effective against vehicles.
Ukrainian paratroopers have posted an epic video of clearing out tree lines from Russian occupiers at full speed. They note that even when assault troops run out of ammo during an airdrop, they still keep firing at the enemy with their rifles. And even with a shotgun, the result is a completed mission and a cleared tree line, as well as footage captured by a reconnaissance drone. Ukrainian soldiers are also clearing out Russian occupiers from destroyed buildings. This is how Special Operations Forces fighters eliminated a group of Russians, preventing the enemy from advancing in the Kupiansk direction, with aerial reconnaissance helping to locate the enemy. And the airborne group carried out an operation to destroy it. The drone operators note that, of course, they mostly hunt for enemy equipment.
We frequently fly over enemy territory.
We fly over areas where the enemy is entrenched and conduct reconnaissance. Our priority targets are first and foremost artillery guns, then armored vehicles and tanks. That includes Grad rocket launchers, tanks, new tanks like the T-90s.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in just the past 24 hours, Ukrainian defense forces destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 5 armored fighting vehicles, 26 artillery systems, and 75 vehicles. They also eliminated another 1,010 Russian servicemen. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army have exceeded 1,118,000 personnel.
The Czechs are planning to deliver modernized tanks to Ukraine that can compete with the most advanced Russian T-90s. The country's chief of the General Staff has proposed sending Kyiv 30 T-72 tanks, which are currently being refurbished at a state-owned enterprise. They were originally intended for use by the Czech armed forces, but after the decision to accelerate the purchase of new Leopard tanks, the upgraded armored vehicles were instead allocated to the Ukrainian armed forces. As noted by the General Staff, this decision is in the interest of the Czech Republic's own national security. Panic in the Kremlin. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that Washington must understand the gravity of the consequences of supplying Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles. The Foreign Ministry of the Federation called on the US to approach any decision on supplying such weapons responsibly. More details in the report by Larisa Petruk.
The subsonic American Tomahawk missiles are capable of striking targets at distances of up to 2,500 kilometers and are equipped with a warhead weighing about 450 kilograms. Low-level flight and high accuracy make them the ideal weapon for hitting various types of military targets, airfields, headquarters, and enemy air defense systems. The Tomahawk can both destroy targets and provide reconnaissance. The missiles discussed during negotiations between the Ukrainian and American sides have variants with ranges of 2,500 and 1,600 kilometers. In
the first case, at least 1,945 Russian military targets would be within their strike radius. In the second, at least 1,655. Ukraine will likely be able to undermine the actions of the Russian army at the front by targeting rear areas that supply it with weapons and support its offensive operations. For example, a plant in the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan could come under attack. Air bases may also become priority targets. 76 of them fall within the range of the longest-range Tomahawks. 67 can be hit by missiles with a shorter range. According to the Moscow Times, strategic bombers take off from one of these bases, Engels 2 in Saratov Oblast, to launch cruise missiles at Ukraine. Recently,
U.S. President Donald Trump stated that he had almost made a decision to supply Tomahawks to Ukraine. But first, as the head of the White House said, he would like to find out how they will be used and which targets will be struck. The publication Axios, citing a source in the Ukrainian government, reports that Washington was concerned that the U.S. would not be able to control how the missiles are used after they are handed over. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is trying to dissuade Trump from supplying Tomahawks to Kiev. Dictator Putin uses various rhetoric, ranging from supposedly friendly advice to outright intimidation. It should also be remembered that the Ukrainian armed forces are already attacking targets deep behind enemy lines. However, Ukrainian drones are inferior to Tomahawk missiles and cannot carry such a warhead.
On October 2nd, Putin, in a threatening manner, warned the United States about the inadmissibility of selling Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, stating that American military personnel would be forced to take direct part in Ukrainian strikes using Tomahawk missiles. Later, on October 5th, Putin threatened that the supply of Tomahawk missiles by the U.S. would lead to the destruction of emerging positive trends in U.S.-Russian relations. The Institute for the Study of War still believes that the Kremlin is trying to portray the potential supply of Tomahawk missiles by the U.S. to Ukraine as a dangerous escalation in order to deter the U.S. from sending such weapons, writes the Institute for the Study of War.
During his speech at the Valda Economic Forum, Dictator Putin commented several times on the topic of transferring Tomahawks to Kyiv. Among the main points, first, the Kremlin will respond to this, though he did not specify how. Second, the missiles will be shot down, though with what means is unknown. Third, Putin assured that this would not affect the situation on the front line and added that the supply of Tomahawks would mark a transition to a qualitatively new level of escalation.
But when the topic of Tomahawks is being pushed, it is a political signal, indeed a demonstration to Putin that there is still an opportunity to move towards diplomacy. However, so far, unfortunately, Putin is not showing any desire to enter into a process that would allow for a just peace to be achieved.
The relevant committee of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine allows for this possibility. At the initial stage, Kyiv may receive no more than a couple dozen missiles. After that, Washington will be guided by Moscow's reaction. If there is no reaction, the pressure will be increased. At
each of these stages, Putin is given the opportunity to retreat and enter into negotiations, and that is why the delivery and use of missiles will most likely be very gradual. Yegor Chernev, deputy chairman of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, commented to Telegraph.
In addition, earlier the American newspaper The Wall Street Journal and the news agency Reuters reported that Washington had decided to provide Ukraine with intelligence for precision strikes on energy infrastructure targets deep within Russian territory.
Undoubtedly, this will certainly make it possible to organize more complex and sophisticated high-quality operations, thereby allowing us to effectively penetrate air defense systems with significantly fewer resources. For example, without the need to launch a large number of weapons that would be intercepted.
At the same time, Reuters clarifies that Washington has long been sharing intelligence with Kyiv, and the Wall Street Journal writes that, I quote, "The new development will make it easier for Ukraine to strike oil refineries in order to deprive the Kremlin of income and oil." Larisa Petruk for Freedom TV Channel.
Russia is waging a hybrid war against Europe. This was stated by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. According to her, the EU must look for new ways to counter Moscow. Von der Leyen also emphasized that we can either stand aside and watch the escalation of Russian threats or face them together with restraint and determination.
Do you not be mistaken, this is part of a troubling picture of growing threats. Across our entire union, undersea cables have been cut, airports and logistics centers have been paralyzed by cyber attacks, and elections have become targets for malicious actors and influence. These incidents are designed to remain in the shadows of denial. These are not random acts of harassment. This is a systematic and escalating campaign aimed at unsettling our citizens, testing our resolve, dividing our union, and weakening our support for Ukraine. And it's time to call things by their proper names. This is hybrid warfare, and we must treat it as such. Very seriously.
In Belgium, unknown drones are circling over one of the largest air defense manufacturing plants in Europe. Their flights have been observed for several months already, but recently the incidents have become more frequent. This was reported by the director of the facility, which is considered secret according to Politico. The plant's director has called on the Belgian authorities to investigate and develop a clear plan to block or shoot down the drones. These statements have emerged against the backdrop of a growing number of reports about unidentified UAVs, in particular in Poland, Romania, Germany, Norway, and Denmark. Lithuania is holding the largest drills in the country's history to test its defense alert system. More than 100 institutions and about 2,000 people are taking part in them. According to the government, the main goal is to assess how effectively Lithuania can defend itself in the event of threats. Today, a large-scale drill was held to evacuate the civilian population from the capital to other municipalities. The exercises will also test the readiness of hospitals to switch to mobilization mode and practice the protection of critical infrastructure facilities. They will also check how Lithuania responds to air raid alerts. The exercises will last until October 11th. They are being conducted against the backdrop of a growing threat from Russia on NATO's eastern flank.
We understand that if an emergency arises requiring the evacuation of Vilnius, this is not an issue that can be resolved in a single day. It may be necessary to evacuate a certain part of the city, a neighborhood, or a street locally. But most likely we need to focus on the entire population of Vilnius, which is 600,000 residents.
Meanwhile, due to GPS interference in Lithuania, a civilian plane was unable to land on its first attempt. According to local media, the incident occurred at Vilnius airport. An aircraft belonging to one of the European airlines flying from Vienna encountered navigation interference while approaching the airport and was forced to abort its landing. It was only able to land on the second attempt. None of the passengers were injured. I should also note that this is not the first such incident. Lithuania's air traffic control reported that in June of this year alone, pilots reported interference 1,022 times. That's twice as often as in May. In Germany, a decision has been made on how to counter drones which have been increasingly spotted over various sites in Europe in the past month. The government has approved amendments to the federal police laws. Now, law enforcement officers will be able to use lasers and jam UAV signals. According to the head of Germany's Ministry of Internal Affairs, new special police units will be created to combat low-flying drones, and the military will deal with more powerful devices. Details in the report by Natalia Husak.
Germany will grant the police the authority to shoot down drones like those that have repeatedly disrupted airport operations across Europe. Several European leaders link these incidents to the hybrid war that Russia is waging against the EU. The new law was already approved by the government on October 8th. Now it awaits approval by the parliaments. We
are creating the opportunity for the federal police to use all necessary technical means against drones, against their control units or their connections. This gives the federal police the ability to use the most advanced technologies to counter threats posed by drones. For example, electromagnetic pulses, jamming, GPS interference, as well as physical measures. This means that the interception and destruction of drones will be regulated in the future and will become possible within the authority of the federal police.
The new law was adopted after, on October 2nd at Munich Airport, the second largest in Germany, dozens of flights were diverted or cancelled due to the detection of unauthorized drones. As a result, more than 10,000 passengers faced difficulties.
Well, we spent the night at the airport, we slept here. I think the closure was justified since there is still a war going on in Europe.
At the end of September, flights of unidentified drones, some of which flew near military facilities and strategic infrastructure, were recorded in Denmark, Sweden, Lithuania, Norway, Finland and Germany. At that time, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz reacted sharply to what had happened and stated that the threats had become daily and real. These include attacks on data centers, attempts to disable digital infrastructure, drones and espionage operations.
There have been repeated violations of airspace here, overflights, drone flights, and attempts at espionage. I have already asked the German defense minister to discuss this issue with the NATO Council over the weekend, in particular with the defense ministers of Poland, France, the United Kingdom, and Germany about how we should respond.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that Russia was behind many of the drones flying over Germany in early October. They were not carrying warheads and were most likely conducting reconnaissance flights. Previously, after similar incidents within the EU, France, Lithuania, Romania, and the United Kingdom granted their security forces the authority to shoot down drones violating their airspace. And the EU Council has already supported boosting defense investments in the European Union budget. In
accordance with the position agreed upon with the Council, we want to open key EU programs to greater defense investment and ensure more flexible, coordinated efforts to strengthen Europe's defense industry and technological base. This is a necessary step toward further enhancing the EU's defense capability by 2030. Marie Bjerre, Minister for European Affairs of Denmark, from a statement on the European Union website, against
the backdrop of recent incidents involving Russian drones entering European airspace, the European Union has begun developing a plan to create a so-called drone wall, a defense system along the eastern flank of the bloc, which is intended to repel drones coming from Russia. This is about more effective detection, tracking, and interception of drones when they enter the airspace of the EU or its allies. Natalia Gusuk, Stangelov Academy for Freedom TV channel.
The Russian shadow fleet continues to pollute the European Sea with oil. Just last year, at least 5 Russian tankers left traces of oil spills off the coast of Europe. This is reported in an investigation by the journalistic group Source Material and the publication Politico. The main part of the shadow fleet consists of old vessels, and their poor technical condition threatens Europe with an environmental disaster. According to preliminary estimates, cleaning the sea after a single major oil spill can cost up to €1.5 billion, and it will be European taxpayers who pay for it if the vessel responsible cannot be found. According to the New York Times, currently every 6th tanker in the world belongs to Russia's shadow fleet, which is about 17% of all operating oil tankers. The fuel crisis in Russia is gaining momentum. Imports of Belarusian gasoline to the Federation have quadrupled compared to August. According to Reuters, it has reached almost 49,000 tons. At the same time, according to Bloomberg's calculations, the production of petroleum products in Russia has plummeted by almost 10% after precise strikes by Ukrainian drones. In which regions are fuel sales limits already being introduced? And why are gas stations across the country shutting down one after another? Nikita Skoblikov investigated the issue.
The number of regions in Russia where gasoline sales are being restricted is growing. After the temporarily occupied Crimea and the Chelyabinsk region, Tyumen and Sverdlovsk have been added to the list. In Tyumen, the N1 gas station chain has set a limit, no more than 30 liters of 92 or 95 octane gasoline per person, and in the Sverdlovsk region, the situation is even more severe. At some gas stations, the fuel has simply run out. Only diesel is left.
In short, the situation with gasoline isn't changing. There's no 90, no 95, not even 92. Basically, only diesel is left. I've only got a range of about 40 kilometers left. That's it. So listen, is there any gasoline in Belgorod? No, there isn't. That's the story.
Already in Russia, people are saying, let's cancel the quality standards, make them more liberal, and Russian automotive blogs are already joking that it might all end with gasoline being sold as 95 or 92, but in reality, it will have a much lower octane rating, which will harm the engines and cars that use this fuel.
According to Novye Izvestia, in October 2025, hundreds of gas stations in Russia may close. Owners do not want to sell fuel at a loss to themselves. The publication notes that during the height of the shortage, from July 28th to September 22nd, experts from the company Omtconsult monitored the operation of 17,000 gas stations and confirmed that at 360 of them, drivers are already being refused gasoline.
We do not expect a street protest of that kind. We will need to watch for isolated outbreaks of discontent, probably around gas stations, maybe some street blockages here and there when people can't get fuel and start demanding gasoline. Because, you know, that's a very childish position. Everyone understands everything, but they'll beat their chests and say, but what do we have to do with this? Give us gasoline. We've loyally supported everything. We've voted for everything. We never went out, never protested. So why us? And this childish attitude at some point will inevitably be outgrown. In order to
cope with the growing fuel shortage, the Kremlin sharply increased gasoline purchases from Belarus. In September 2025, imports of Belarusian fuel quadrupled compared to August, reaching 49,000 tons. According to Reuters, 33,000 tons of diesel fuel were also supplied from Belarus to the Russian market in just 1 month.
Russia is importing gasoline and from various regions, Asia, China, other countries, and Europe, including from Belarus. This is one of the outcomes of Putin's war. The country at the gas pump is not selling, but importing gasoline. These are the rightful results of the work of Ukraine's security service, our armed forces, our intelligence, and our Ukrainian weapons manufacturers.
The main reason for the fuel crisis in Russia is the precise strikes by Ukrainian drones on oil refineries. Since the beginning of August, at least 28 facilities have been hit, which, according to the Moscow Times, has brought fuel production down to multi-year lows. In October, oil processing at Russian refineries dropped to 4,860,000 barrels per day. This is 10% less than in July. Compared to October of last year, the decline is 5%, and relative to the pre-war year of 2021, it is already 14%. As a result, processing volumes have reached their lowest level in at least the past 5 years.
In October, the Antipinsky refinery in the Tyumen region, Slavneft Yaroslavnefteorg Synthes in Yaroslavl, Rosneft's Tuapse refinery, Orsknefteorg Synthes in the Orenburg region, as well as Kinef in the Leningrad region, came under attack. The latter, due to a fire, was forced to shut down its main primary oil processing unit, which accounted for 40% of its capacity, according to a publication by the Moscow Times.
The strikes on Russian refineries have forced the Kremlin to ramp up oil shipments by sea. According to Bloomberg, over the past 4 weeks, shipping volumes have remained almost at their highest level in 16 months. But it seems that Russia will no longer be able to increase its exports. The spare capacity of the ports is running out. The two main hubs, Primorsk in the Baltic region and Novorossiysk on the Black Sea, are operating at full capacity. A third port, Ust-Luga, could theoretically increase shipments, but since the beginning of the year, its figures are still below the peaks of October 2024. Meanwhile, the European Union is ramping up the pressure. The 19th package of sanctions is being prepared, which, according to Bloomberg, will specifically target Russia's so-called shadow fleet. Moreover, EU ambassadors have agreed on a plan to completely phase out Russian gas and oil by 2028, despite the positions of Hungary and Slovakia, Reuters reports. Nikita Skoblekov for 3DAM TV channel.